If you ever find yourself north of Akron after midnight, there's a road that ends too early. It begins where the map starts to lose its confidence, where the roads grow thinner, where names disappear into trees. North of Akron, tucked in the folds of Summit County, lies a place that cartographers once marked as Boston, Ohio. But nobody calls it that anymore. In the 1970s, the federal government came through, buying up homes under eminent domain, promising a new national park. What they left behind wasn't nature reclaimed. It was abandonment perfected. A handful of homes were demolished, others stood gutted, half collapsed, their wallpaper peeling like scabs. The residents called it theft. Outsiders started calling it Helltown. It was a joke at first, then a warning. Today, the air there feels wrong, heavy in the chest, like a pause before thunder. Locals say if you park your car at the dead end where Stanford Road meets the barricade and kill your engine, you'll hear it. The low hum of something still living inside a town that was told to die. The government claimed the eviction was temporary, a park expansion that simply never reached its finish line. But the work stopped, and silence took over. Houses were boarded, churches chained, and 1,000 whispered theories filled the vacuum left behind. People spoke of satanic rituals, of chemicals buried in the soil, of lights that moved without pattern. To most, Helltown was just another American ghost town, until the stories became consistent. Teenagers started sneaking past the road-closed signs for a thrill, only to return pale, swearing they'd seen someone standing just beyond their headlights. Not a ghost, not quite human. A figure too still, too precise. They called it the Watcher. Sometimes it appeared near the church, sometimes by the creek, sometimes in the woods beside the barricade. Always watching, never chasing. When asked to describe it, everyone used the same 3 words: tall, silent, waiting. The first official report came on a fog-heavy night in November 1977. A Summit County deputy patrolling Stanford Road stopped when his headlights caught movement by the ditch. What he saw looked like a man in a long coat, standing ankle-deep in the mist, his head tilted slightly as if studying the cruiser. The deputy rolled down his window and called out, asking if he needed help. No reply. When he stepped out of the car, the figure stepped backward, one measured motion, and vanished. The deputy swept his flashlight through the fog, finding nothing but wet grass and the faint smell of metal. He wrote the encounter down as a possible trespasser, but off the record he added 6 words on the back of the form: aware. Deciding whether to answer, the report was filed. By morning, the tire marks were gone, as if the ground corrected the mistake of remembering. A month later, in December 1977, 2 hunters were found wandering the Helltown woods after sunrise, dazed and trembling. They claimed to have met a man standing beneath an old oak, half in shadow. "He asked if we lived here," one said. When we said no, he nodded, like that was the right answer. The man turned and walked toward the tree line. When the hunters followed, his footprints ended at frost that didn't break. They left their rifles behind and ran the half-mile to the highway. The sheriff's department chalked it up to panic, but both men refused to hunt again. Years later, one of them told his son he still woke up to the sound of someone breathing next to the bed. Slow, steady, as if counting him alive. Locals began to accept the Watcher as part of the landscape the same way you accept wind or rot, something that simply belongs. Skeptics said it was a leftover squatter, maybe an old ranger who never moved on. But odd things started happening in the spring of 1978. Windows that had been nailed shut were found pried open from the inside. Birds stopped nesting in the valley. On one stretch of road, engines would sputter to silence as if the air itself refused combustion. That summer, teenagers on a dare filmed themselves shouting into the woods. When they replayed the tape, the wind answered back, not in words, but in perfect rhythm with their own laughter, delayed by just one breath. From then on, the people of Summit County didn't talk about Helltown as a place. They talked about it like an ear pressed against the state, listening. By the summer of 1978, the Watcher had become a quiet superstition, something locals acknowledged the way sailors acknowledge bad weather. The sheriff's department, tired of prank calls, stopped patrolling the area after dusk. But for some reason, wildlife biologists kept coming. One of them, a man named Dr. Stephen Calloway, filed a short report that would later vanish from the county archive. It mentioned a frequency disturbance near the creek bed, a drop in ambient noise lasting exactly 12 seconds at a time. Birds stopped mid-song. Frogs went silent. The phenomenon followed no wind direction, and when Calloway tried to record it, his tape deck jammed with the faint click of metal on metal. His field notes ended with a question that no scientist should have to write. Why does silence seem to move? The following week, Calloway's assistant refused to return to the site, saying he'd seen someone crouching beneath the roots. Later, trees there were found bent away from the creek, as if silence itself had shouldered past and the forest refused to touch it. Urban explorers followed soon after, drawn by rumor like moths to the wrong kind of flame. They came armed with flashlights, camcorders, and teenage immortality. They filmed the graffiti, the boarded houses, the old church said to bear an upside-down cross, though in truth it was just a design flaw, a carpenter's alignment error from 1904. Still, it felt evil when caught in flashlight glare. In one surviving tape from 1981, you can hear a girl whisper, "Do you feel like we're being graded?" Her friend laughs nervously, but the beam trembles. Moments later, the video turns black. When the camcorder was found weeks later, the battery was drained, the tape still recording silence. Locals who heard the recovered audio said they could make out a faint inhale between the static. Some swore it was the sound of someone leaning over the microphone, not close enough to touch, but close enough to let you know they could. On playback, the wind breathed in time with them, one beat late. Around that same time, a retired pastor named Reverend Albie Monroe began driving to Helltown each Friday evening to pray for the lost ground. He told friends that it didn't feel abandoned, only paused. He kept a journal of small encounters, a light in a house with no power, a crow that followed his car from the highway all the way to the barricade, the faint echo of a door closing, though every door he passed hung open. One entry stands apart from the rest. Saw a man by the steeple tonight. Thought it was a ranger, but its shadow fell the wrong way. When I blinked, the shadow corrected me. Weeks later, Monroe stopped visiting. His congregation said he'd lost his voice to nerves. When he died in 1984, his journal was found beneath his bed. The last page contained only one unfinished line. He's learning when to... The sentence trailed off in a scratch that cut through the paper. Through the late 80s, the Watcher's story faded from newspapers, but survived in parking lot retellings and sleepover whispers. Kids dared each other to knock 3 times on the barricade and listen for a knock in return. Some claimed to hear it. Others said the forest only echoed your own impatience. In 1989, 2 brothers from Cleveland were arrested for breaking into one of the remaining homes. Their flashlight footage, later released, showed peeling floral wallpaper, a broken mirror, and something else. A reflection moving when they didn't. The elder brother insisted that what they captured was someone inside the wall. When police reviewed the tape, the reflection was gone, but the timestamp froze for 8 seconds, then caught up all at once. The elder brother said later, he wasn't stuck there. He was waiting to come out. They were fined, released, and refused to talk about it again. Decades later, when one of them was interviewed for a documentary, he said quietly, he wasn't stuck there. He was waiting to come out. By the early 1990s, Helltown had developed 2 versions of itself. The first was bureaucratic, a patch of condemned land owned by the U.S. government, its fate tied up in paperwork and forgotten budgets. The second was folkloric, a place where something unseen had inherited the silence. Locals said that if you drove the road at night, you'd sometimes see a person standing beneath the yellow "No Outlet" sign, facing away from you. If you honked, they didn't move. If you passed them, they'd still be there in your rearview mirror. Same distance, same stillness. A few drivers tried to confront the figure, but those who did reported strange lapses in time. One man swore the drive home should have taken 10 minutes. His dashboard clock said it took 47. When he pulled into his driveway, his car radio clicked on by itself, whispering a frequency that didn't exist. In 1991, a forestry contractor named Charles Dempsey was hired to assess soil stability near the condemned section of Helltown. His field notes were ordinary until page 9. There, in cramped handwriting, he logged unaccounted movement near test site, a dark outline, tall and motionless, standing in the fog about 40 yards away. Dempsey assumed it was a fellow surveyor until it shifted against the wind. He radioed his team, but no one answered. The static came in heavy rhythmic bursts that sounded almost like breathing. Later that week, his camera developed 3 frames of gray blur, each darker at the center. Dempsey mailed the photos to his supervisor with a short letter, "Something's watching. I think it knows we're trespassing." He quit the job the next day. When investigators checked the site months later, they found the theodolite he'd used half buried in soil, pointing toward a patch of forest that wasn't marked on any official map. The county archives hold a memo dated October 23, 1992, addressed from the National Park Service to the Summit County Sheriff. It references recurring disturbances and a request for coordinated patrols to prevent vandalism, but in the margins, someone had handwritten a note in pencil: advise officers not to engage if visual contact is made. That instruction was never explained. When reporters filed a Freedom of Information Act request years later, the copy came back blacked out, but the pencil emboss remained. Do not engage if visual contact is made. Someone underlined visual twice, like the danger was being seen seeing it. Rumors spread that government officials knew something about Helltown that they wouldn't say publicly, something not worth disproving. Some believed they'd stumbled onto an illegal dumping ground. Others whispered about chemical testing gone wrong. But those who'd seen the figure firsthand, or thought they had, swore that it wasn't anything human. One former deputy speaking anonymously decades later, put it simply: you can't arrest something that just looks at you. The next verifiable sighting came in the winter of 1994. A local mail carrier named Judith Haynes was driving her rural route before dawn when her headlights caught what she thought was a hitchhiker near the curve of Stanford Road. The figure stood completely still, one hand lifted as though signaling her to slow down. When she stopped, it lowered its arm and stepped backward into the dark. Thinking it might be someone in trouble, Judith called it out, but her own breath fogged the glass before the sound could escape. She later called it thick, like the air had decided not to carry sound. She delivered the rest of her route shaking. When asked to return for questioning, she refused, telling investigators, "That thing doesn't blink." For the next 10 years, she changed her route voluntarily. On her final day before retirement, she drove past the barricade one last time and said she saw it again, this time standing beside the church facing the road as if waiting for her to say goodbye. By 1996, the local legend had reached national ears. Paranormal investigators, radio hosts, and late-night thrill-seekers started flocking to Helltown, eager to record proof of the watcher. A few succeeded, or thought they did. One team captured an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, that they claimed contained a whisper repeating the word "stay." Others recorded unexplainable interference, like a low hum that faded in and out at 19 hertz, a frequency known to induce dread in humans. The skeptics blamed faulty equipment. The believers blamed curiosity. One researcher described the feeling of being examined while walking the site, as if an unseen intelligence mirrored every footstep. He said the sensation only stopped when he turned off his flashlight. When asked what he saw, he replied, "Nothing. That's the problem. It saw me first." The recording of that night was later lost in a hard drive fire, though the metadata timestamp remained frozen at 3:03 a.m., a clock that refused to admit the moment passed. Around the turn of the millennium, Helltown was more rumor than reality, a name people invoked at bonfires or whispered to test courage. But for the few who lived nearby, the fear hadn't faded. Local farmers reported livestock found outside fenced pastures, gates still locked from the inside. One man claimed he'd seen his own shadow detach for a moment while walking home after dark. The sheriff's department stopped logging calls from the area altogether. What used to be written down as trespassing or unidentified subject now went unrecorded. When pressed by reporters, one official said, "Some places don't need more witnesses." A retired ranger who worked the area in the early 2000s said he once followed a shape through the fog until it turned, and he realized it had no face, only the idea of one. "It's not haunting the town," he said. "It's haunting what's left of belief." In the early 2000s, curiosity found a new home online. Message boards dedicated to the paranormal began circulating grainy photos said to show the watcher near the old barricade. Most were easily dismissed: fog, lens flare, camera shake. But one image stood apart. Posted anonymously in 2003, it showed the faint outline of a figure standing just beyond the road closed sign. The poster claimed the image was taken from a moving car, yet the figure appeared perfectly centered in each frame. Metadata analysis revealed that the timestamp advanced normally until the final shot, which skipped forward by exactly 3 minutes. Investigators chalked it up to a digital error. But longtime residents of Summit County noticed something else: the position of the trees. They were wrong. Trees that should have been parallel to the road now leaned toward the figure, as though bending mid-frame. The photo vanished within days, and the original user account deleted itself. But in forums and chat rooms, a single comment survived, reposted endlessly. "It wasn't in front of me when I took it. It was behind me." The trees leaned toward the figure only in the final frame, as if the forest bowed. By 2006, the watcher had become a meme, shared, joked about, trivialized. Teenagers filmed fake sightings with cheap camcorders, adding VHS filters and static to make their edits convincing. Yet, among the flood of forgeries, one recording felt wrong in a way that even skeptics couldn't explain. Shot on an overcast afternoon, it showed nothing for the first 20 seconds, just wind brushing through pine branches. Then, a faint click echoed, followed by the camera jolting downward as if dropped. The screen shook, refocused, and showed a sliver of motion, something dark, retreating into the fog. The final frame captured the cameraman's feet as he turned to run. The video abruptly ended, but when digital forensics examined the file, they found an extra 6 seconds of black screen that no editing software could account for. When brightened, the footage revealed two faint reflections: one pair of shoes, stationary in the mist, and another pair, toe-to-toe, not his. The uploader deleted his account a week later, citing too many nightmares. Around that time, a local journalist named Marianne Keller wrote a column titled "The Thing That Watches Back." Her goal was to debunk the myth. She visited the site herself, interviewing former deputies, rangers, and longtime residents. Every one of them told her the same warning: don't go alone, don't stop moving. Keller ignored them. On the evening of her visit, she parked near the barricade, switched off her headlights, and began recording an audio log for her article. Her final words captured on tape were, "It's quiet, I think," followed by a deep exhale and a single metallic scrape. The rest of the recording was wind, steady, and low. When searchers found her car 3 hours later, the keys were still in the ignition, and her microphone sat on the passenger seat. Keller herself was found walking along Route 303 at dawn, disoriented but unharmed. She remembered only the scrape and a voice touching the question, "Do you live here?" She never filed the column. She never drove that road again. The Keller case reignited national fascination. Paranormal shows, amateur documentarians, and online investigators flooded the area, each trying to capture the watcher. Drones buzzed over rooftops, journalists measured electromagnetic fields, and thrill seekers sold tours of the barricade for $20 a head. But Helltown resisted being pinned down. Equipment failed. Batteries drained twice as fast. Compass needles spun aimlessly. A drone pilot from Columbus claimed his GPS marked the same location 5 miles apart in a single flight path. When he checked the footage later, the video was intact, but the sound wasn't. Instead of propeller hum, the audio captured a faint rhythmic tapping exactly 7 beats apart. The cadence matched a 1994 EVP, 7s again. When users linked the two files, both disappeared within 48 hours. Experts dismissed it as vibration distortion, yet the pattern matched an earlier EVP recording from 1994, one that had also repeated in 7s. When this was pointed out online, both videos vanished from their respective platforms within 48 hours. The usernames that posted them were deleted. In both cases, the account's recovery emails were the same: boston_ohio@mail.net, a domain that had never existed. By the late 2000s, Helltown had become less a place and more a presence, something that seeped through pixels and paragraphs, replicating itself through attention. The more people searched for answers, the more the details changed. Some described the watcher as a man in a long coat. Others claimed it was faceless, tall, featureless, or even reflective, like a mirror that moved when the rest of the world stood still. Each new sighting contradicted the last, yet they all agreed on one thing: the air there felt aware. In 2009, a local physics professor studying low-frequency vibrations visited the site with recording equipment. His results showed a subharmonic tone just below the range of human hearing, consistent, structured, almost mechanical. In his final note before the project was shelved, he wrote, "This isn't random noise. It's a signal. The question isn't whether it's man-made. It's whether it's meant for us." He died of a heart attack 2 months later. His instruments were never recovered. By 2010, Helltown had stopped being a destination. The barricades were rusted, the church sagged inward, and even the thrill-seekers had moved on to fresher horrors. But those who lived nearby said the quiet had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore, it was aware. A retired ranger named Paul Denton, who'd spent 2 decades patrolling the surrounding woods, described it best. "You start to feel like the silence is practicing on you." Denton once claimed he saw a man standing halfway down the old canal path, motionless. When he called out, the man raised his hand, not to wave, but to mirror his gesture. They stood like that for 10 seconds, each echoing the other. When Denton finally dropped his arm, the figure vanished, leaving behind a ripple in the grass that bent toward him. He retired 2 weeks later, telling his wife that the forest was learning human behavior. No one laughed when he said it. Around that same time, strange vandalism appeared on the church door. Not symbols, but words. Carved neatly into the wood in precise serif letters were the words, "We remember you." The sheriff assumed it was a prank. Workers sanded it off and repainted the door, but by the following week, the phrase returned, this time carved deeper, into the same exact spot. The church was eventually boarded up, its windows sealed. When a reporter visited in 2011 to document the restoration, she noted something peculiar. The boards on the inside of the church were new, clean, unweathered, but no one on the work crew could explain who had put them there. The contractor joked that maybe the watcher finally wanted privacy. But the next morning, when he opened the site trailer, every clipboard and pen inside was neatly lined up, facing the door. He quit the same day, telling colleagues the setup looked like an audience waiting for him to speak. In 2012, a graduate student from Cleveland State University named Henry Voss began compiling every known reference to the Watcher legend for his thesis on collective folklore. He interviewed locals, studied property records, and even obtained redacted government memos through FOIA. One night, while editing transcripts in his dorm room, his roommate reported hearing him mutter, "That's not what they said." Over and over. The next morning, Voss was gone. His laptop remained open on the desk, displaying an unfinished document titled "The One Who Waits." The file contained only a single line. "It's not looking out." Its looking in his disappearance sparked brief media coverage before tapering off, dismissed as stress-induced flight. But months later, his mother received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was his student ID, scratched but intact, and a note that read, "Tell them he asked the wrong questions." The postmark was from Akron, but the handwriting, experts said, was Voss's own. After Voss's disappearance, the town's relationship with Helltown changed. Locals stopped giving interviews. Park rangers avoided the topic altogether. The area became a void, an absence protected by red tape and disinterest. But in the absence of answers, the Watcher grew stronger online. Podcasts and YouTube channels picked apart every thread of evidence, crafting theories that blurred truth and fiction. Some said the Watcher was the ghost of a federal agent who died during the 1970s evictions. Others insisted it was an experiment in human perception, a low-frequency presence designed to test mass hysteria. One theory, darker than the rest, claimed the Watcher was the town itself, condensed into a single being to guard what was taken from it. For every skeptic who dismissed these ideas, there was a believer ready with a story. Headlights flickering, footsteps pacing, radio static whispering a question. Do you live here? The more people tried to explain it, the less explainable it became. In 2014, a restoration initiative briefly reopened access to the area. Construction crews arrived to stabilize the remaining buildings, documenting progress through daily photos. On the seventh day, one worker noticed something strange in a frame taken outside the church. Standing at the tree line was a dark, human-like outline. It wasn't there in the photos taken seconds before or after. The project halted for inspection, but when the county reviewed the data, the image had already been overwritten. Only the file name remained, IMG_0000. No such file existed in the sequence. The crew chief told the local paper it was a glitch, though privately he admitted he'd received an email that same night from an unknown sender containing the same photo. But in this version, the figure was closer. Metadata placed the sender's location at 40.261 degrees north, 81.560 degrees west, the exact coordinates of the barricade itself. The email deleted itself within minutes. The sender's geotag? 40 degrees, 26.1 degrees north, 81 degrees, 56.0 degrees west. The barricade, exactly. By 2015, the Watcher had become a paradox. The more people documented it, the less they captured. Cell phones, drones, body cams, all failed the same way. Either the footage refused to render or it came back blank, as if the lens had blinked at the wrong moment. The only consistent evidence came from sound. Dozens of field recordings taken near Stanford Road carried a faint mechanical pulse, a steady, measured rhythm of 6 beats repeating like a heart that refused to die. When a sound engineer slowed one file to 1/4 speed, the pulse formed a pattern resembling speech. It wasn't English. Some thought it was Morse. Others called it interference. But one linguist at the University of Toledo noticed something chilling. The intervals matched human breathing cycles. "It's like," she said in an interview, "something's trying to learn how to talk, still choosing which mouth to use." She later withdrew her statement, asking that her name be removed from the publication. That same year, a park ranger named Eli Moreno was assigned to patrol the surrounding area after a string of trespassing incidents. He'd laughed at the stories, calling them cheap horror for tourists. But one night, just after midnight, he radioed dispatch in a trembling voice. "I see movement by the Miller Place." Advise, the call lasted 12 seconds before cutting off. Backup arrived an hour later. Eli's truck was parked at the road's edge, lights still on, driver's door open. Inside, his radio was transmitting an endless loop of static, but through it, faintly, came his own voice repeating, "Advise." The sound file corrupted before forensic review. Eli returned to work weeks later, pale and quiet. When his supervisor asked what he'd seen, he said only, "It didn't want me to see it," he said. "It wanted me to notice it was granting permission." He quit soon after, never filing another report. Helltown's silence began to behave like contagion. People who visited reported insomnia, vivid dreams, and intrusive thoughts of being watched. A psychology department in Columbus quietly conducted a study in 2016, inviting volunteers to view a slideshow of the area's photos and measure stress response. Within a week, over half the participants dropped out, citing feelings of suffocation or an unshakable awareness. One subject, during debrief, said, "It's not that something's there, it's that I'm the thing being looked at." The researchers dismissed it as suggestion bias, but later, the lab experienced a power surge that corrupted every hard drive used in the study. The lead psychologist resigned soon after, telling colleagues she'd started seeing a figure in doorways that disappeared when she blinked. Her resignation letter ended with a single line. "Some places don't need to be entered," she wrote. "They enter you and take attendance." The file was never published. By 2017, the story had metastasized online. Threads, podcasts, and documentaries flooded social media, each insisting they'd uncovered the real truth. Conspiracy theorists connected the watcher to Cold War psychological tests. Occultists tied it to pagan sentinels guarding the underworld. Rationalists argued it was a shared hallucination brought on by low-frequency sound. Yet the photos kept coming. One, posted to Reddit late that year, showed a group of teenagers posing near the barricade. In the corner of the image, half obscured by fog, a second group of figures appeared, mirroring their exact poses. Analysts claimed it was a double exposure, but the teens swore they'd been alone. The post vanished within hours. The owner left one line, "They moved when we didn't." Months later, users reported hearing knocks while scrolling past the archived link. For months afterward, people claimed to hear knocking sounds when scrolling past the thread. The site's admin eventually archived the entire post, labeling it glitch media. No copy exists, at least not online. When people talk about Helltown now, it's not about ghosts or monsters, it's about reflection. Something in that place seems to mirror whoever looks for it. For some, it shows fascination. For others, fear. One researcher called it a consciousness with no shape, waiting for a mind to borrow. The theory was ridiculed until the researcher disappeared the following year, leaving behind his recorder still running. The audio captured 47 minutes of wind and footsteps, followed by a faint click and a voice whispering something unintelligible. Forensic linguists slowed it down and enhanced the pitch. What they heard made them mute the file halfway through. The phrase repeated 3 times, soft but deliberate. "You are facing the wrong way," repeated 3 times, soft, patient, like instruction. When the recording leaked years later, it spread across message boards like an infection. People insisting they heard their own name whispered over the phrase. Most called it pareidolia. Others just called it recognition. By 2018, the watcher had been quiet for nearly a decade, or perhaps people had simply stopped listening. But silence, when fed enough attention, always finds a new voice. That spring, a YouTube channel dedicated to abandoned Americana uploaded a 30-minute exploration of Helltown. The footage began like every other urban exploration video: banter, flashlight glare, creaking floorboards. At 11:42, the cameraman pans past the church doors. For a single frame, a pale face appears in the reflection. No eyes, no mouth, just the suggestion of a head leaning closer. The editor swore he hadn't added it, claiming the raw footage glitched there naturally. Within hours, the video hit 500,000 views. Comments flooded in with timestamps, slowed replays, pixel analysis. Some users insisted the face moved slightly between frames. Others claimed it blinked. 2 days later, the video disappeared. The channel owner deleted his account, leaving only one community post. It's still uploading. He later said the progress bar kept advancing after the PC was unplugged, and the room got colder when it hit 307. Curiosity bred pilgrimage. By 2019, tour groups were sneaking into Helltown under the cover of night, live streaming their trespasses for tips and clout. The forest became a backdrop for adrenaline, not reverence. But the watcher seemed to adapt. One group's stream cut out mid-broadcast after the cameraman whispered, "Someone's behind the barricade." Viewers watching live reported hearing faint footsteps that continued after the video froze. When authorities found the group's van, all equipment was accounted for, but the phones were missing their back covers, batteries removed, screens dark. Data recovery specialists later retrieved fragments of one recording, a 0.3-second clip showing the same forest from a low angle, as if the phone had been placed on the ground. For those few frames, a blurred silhouette fills the right side of the screen, hand outstretched, not reaching for the phone, but past it, toward whoever might be watching. The influx of visitors forced the county to act. New fencing went up, signage replaced, and cameras installed along the old roads. Yet the more surveillance increased, the less it captured. Motion sensors triggered in empty air. Data feeds froze precisely at 3:07 a.m. every night, and the cameras that faced the forest began returning frames with inverted color. White trees, black sky. Analysts said it was thermal interference. Skeptics called it hoax. Still, when the sheriff's office reviewed one night's footage manually, they found something unnerving. Every frame between 3:06 and 3:08 was identical, except for a faint vertical shadow moving closer in 2-inch increments. No shape, no definition, just proximity, 2 inches closer per frame, between 3:06 and 3:08. The next morning, one of the mounted cameras was discovered turned backward, aimed squarely at the town instead of the woods. Its lens was clean. The metal casing bore 4 fingerprints pressed perfectly side by side, though the surface temperature registered 10 degrees colder than ambient air. That same autumn, a true crime documentarian named Lena Croft arrived to film what she called the definitive Helltown investigation. She interviewed old residents, deputies, even the descendants of those evicted in the 1970s. Everyone told her the same warning: don't look through glass after dark. She laughed it off until her second night of filming. While reviewing B-roll inside her rented cabin, she caught her own reflection in the window, and another, standing behind her. She spun around. Nothing. The recording shows her breathing heavy, whispering, "It's outside, isn't it?" The glass suddenly fogs from the outside in, forming 5 streaks as if from fingertips. The clip cuts to black. Police later found the cabin intact, lights still on, camera running. The footage had stopped at exactly 3:07 a.m. The timestamp read 00:00:00, as if time didn't pass so much as rehearse. After Croft's disappearance, media attention exploded. Major networks descended on Summit County, dissecting her last footage frame by frame. Experts debated compression artifacts, temperature shifts, optical illusions, but no one could explain the condensation forming inwards. For locals, it was déjà vu, outsiders swooping in, mining tragedy for headlines. Yet, amid the frenzy, something subtle began happening. Reporters covering the story described power outages, corrupted audio files, and faint tapping noises during interviews. One journalist from Cleveland claimed she heard her own voice whispering behind her during playback, an echo that didn't belong to any mic. The newsroom dismissed it as cross-channel bleed. She quit the next week, leaving a note on her desk. "It's not a story, it's a rehearsal." After that, the story died. Helltown was once again left alone, or as alone as a place can be when the quiet keeps practicing human speech. By 2020, Helltown existed more online than on Earth. Thousands of clips, blogs, and watcher-explained videos flooded every platform, each trying to define what defied definition. But those who lived nearby said the air itself felt thinner, not in oxygen, but in confidence. "It's like the atmosphere doesn't trust you," one resident said. In March that year, a pandemic emptied the roads, and for the first time in decades, the forest was left in complete isolation. No tourists, no explorers, no noise. Satellite imagery later showed something strange. Faint trails of disturbed snow crisscrossing the barricade area. Footprints that began nowhere and ended mid-forest. Thermal scans detected residual heat, but no bodies. The files were quietly archived under environmental interference. The folder later showed as empty. When restrictions lifted months later, rangers returned to find the fences bent outward, not inward. Someone, or something, had left. Or perhaps it had simply followed the silence wherever the people had gone. In the years that followed, a new generation discovered the story not through news, but through algorithm. The Watcher Challenge trended briefly on TikTok. Teenagers filming themselves walking the barricade at 3:07 a.m., hoping to hear the static hum for viral fame. Most clips showed nothing. A few caught flickers of motion in the tree line or headlights that didn't belong to any visible car. One video, now deleted, went viral after capturing a faint voice whispering, "Turn around." The account that uploaded it was banned after viewers reported psychological distress from playback. What platforms couldn't stop was the pattern. Every video tagged #HelltownWatcher began glitching at exactly the 3:07 mark, freezing for 1 second before resuming. Engineers blamed corrupted compression data. Skeptics called it coincidence. But the timecode matched too neatly, repeating across devices, countries, and file formats. It was as if the Watcher learned attention's grammar and started conjugating it at 3:07. When professional investigators returned in 2022, they treated Helltown less like a crime scene and more like an equation that refused to balance. One team installed magnetic field sensors along the old canal route. For 3 nights, readings were normal. On the 4th, every instrument recorded a pulse that lasted exactly 66 seconds. During that time, all GPS coordinates drifted precisely 18 meters east, then corrected themselves as if nothing had happened. The lead investigator described the phenomenon as a tear that closed too politely. He later received a phone call from his own number at 3:07 a.m. The line was open, silent, until a faint exhale sounded, followed by his own recorded voice saying, "Advise," the same word Ranger Eli Moreno had repeated 6 years earlier. The call log showed no record of the number ever connecting. The following week, the investigators' data servers wiped themselves completely, replaced with a single file named "Do You Live Here?".txt. The file was empty. The directory name changed by itself to DO_not engage. The county stopped issuing statements. For every official explanation, there was a new mystery. And for every mystery, a new skeptic trying to end it. But the Watcher no longer needed believers. It had permanence now, woven into local speech. Parents warned their children to stay off the back roads not because of ghosts, but because the forest listens. Mail carriers avoided the route even in daylight. At night, motion-activated trail cameras captured fleeting shapes that seemed to move between frames instead of within them. A local podcaster who spent 3 nights recording near the barricade claimed that playback revealed whispers under the wind, voices repeating his own words seconds after he spoke them, correcting his phrasing. "It's not mocking," he said in the episode that never aired. "It's learning to sound human." The file was deleted before upload. When his editor restored it from backup, the title had changed by itself to Draft_1, like the voice planned a second pass. By 2023, the forest had grown back over most of the town's bones. Roofs collapsed under ivy. The road cracked and vanished beneath moss. Only the steeple remained, a skeletal finger rising from the green. Visitors said it looked like the forest had forgiven everything but memory. Yet when the wind passed through that hollow tower, it made a sound like breath catching in a throat. A new ranger, fresh from training, called it beautiful. The locals corrected him, "It's practicing." He laughed until he realized none of them were joking. Every dusk, as the light bled into blue and the day gave up its last certainty, that sound returned, steady, patient, expectant, like someone learning how to breathe again, like something rehearsing for speech. And in the fading light, if you stood still long enough, you could almost hear it try the first syllable of a name, yours, then hold the breath for later. By 2024, Helltown's story was less about sightings and more about the people who tried to understand them. Researchers, journalists, and explorers all seemed to share one trait. They spoke slower afterward. Words became measured, deliberate, as if they feared echoing themselves. When asked why they kept returning, most couldn't answer. "It's like walking into déjà vu," one photographer said, "but the memory doesn't belong to you." Locals noticed the same pattern, visitors leaving with a kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. They'd return home, close their blinds, and still feel as though something on the other side was mimicking the gesture. A professor of anthropology who'd written the definitive paper on Helltown's folklore later admitted, off record, "I don't think it wants to be solved. I think it wants to be remembered." When pressed to explain, she only smiled, tiredly. There's a difference between looking at something and being looked at for too long. Some places become holy by accident. Helltown was one of them, not blessed, not cursed, but consecrated through repetition. The road to the barricade became a pilgrimage trail. People brought flowers, ribbons, old keys, and photographs of loved ones who had vanished elsewhere. They left them at the signpost, treating the watcher like a custodian of unanswered questions. Rangers cleaned them up, but new offerings appeared by morning. No one saw who left them. A time-lapse camera set to monitor the site captured nothing between frames, only the subtle shifting of shadows as each item reappeared one by one. When analysts studied the footage, they realized the gifts had formed a pattern, a near-perfect spiral curling inward toward the woods. Someone tried mapping it mathematically, but the spiral didn't close. It extended infinitely, always folding back into itself. Like a breath, said one observer, or a loop that doesn't know where it started. The watcher had outlived its witnesses. Those who'd claimed to see it in the 70s and 80s were mostly gone, but their children and grandchildren still spoke of the silence like an inheritance. It's not fear anymore, one local teenager said. It's etiquette. You don't whistle on Stanford Road. You don't play music. You don't call out names. The new generation didn't need proof. They had pattern. Phones still lost signal in the same spots. The forest still held its breath at the same hour. And sometimes, late at night, car alarms across the valley triggered in perfect sequence, as if an invisible procession was moving through the streets, reminding everyone that recognition can be contagious. In a world where myths usually fade with time, the watcher did the opposite. It learned patience, it learned rhythm, and most chilling of all, it learned how to wait without moving. In December 2024, a former audio engineer named Greg Stone decided to record one final attempt at capturing the watcher's sound. He set up microphones along the creek, calibrated them for infrasound, and streamed the feed live online. For 3 hours, there was nothing but wind and water. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the stream froze. Viewers flooded the comments. Seconds later, the screen flickered back, now showing the empty church interior. The camera had moved on its own. The audio was distorted, layered with faint voices that formed no words but carried intent, like language still under construction. When engineers replayed the recording later, they noticed an impossible detail. The voices weren't echoing from the church. They were coming from inside the microphone itself. Stone's channel vanished the next day. His home was found undisturbed, his equipment still running. The live stream timer reset to 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, and looped. The chat counter increased anyway. Today, few people visit Helltown in person. The road remains closed, the signs faded, the forest thick as memory, yet somehow the watcher continues to spread. Through videos, photos, even sound bites shared too many times. Some swear that if you play old recordings from the area at low volume, you can hear breathing adjust to your rhythm. Others report that their reflection lags a moment behind when watching the footage alone. Scientists say it's pareidolia, the brain chasing patterns. But those who've stood by the barricade at dusk insist it's simpler than that. It's learning to see through us, one man whispered to a journalist. It doesn't need eyes. It has us. And when asked what he meant, he only smiled weakly and added, "That's why the story never ends. It's still recording." In 2025, the federal government officially removed Boston Township from redevelopment consideration. The report cited environmental instability and long-term acoustic interference. The decision barely made news. To most, Helltown was already gone, consumed by its own legend. But within the declassified documents lay a single curious detail, a technical note describing periodic resonance phenomena matching no known mechanical source. It listed the location as Stanford Road, 3:07 a.m. The phrase was underlined twice in pen. A technician later admitted that the sound was faint but unmistakable, like a heartbeat picked up through walls. When asked if the team tried to trace its origin, he laughed nervously. You don't chase something that sounds alive if you're not sure it's supposed to be. He requested reassignment the following morning. The recording itself was filed under anomalous environmental event and quietly misplaced before it could ever be reviewed. When spring came, so did the fog. It rose thick from the valley floor and hung between the pines like unfinished sentences. Travelers who drove through at dawn said their radios would tune themselves to dead stations, emitting a low whisper that somehow matched the rhythm of their own breath. Locals stopped correcting them. The few rangers who still patrolled the perimeter avoided the church altogether, claiming their body cams drained faster there. One officer described hearing footsteps beside his own for nearly a minute, matching pace perfectly until the gravel underfoot changed pitch, then stopping altogether. He refused to walk that trail again. Others dismissed it as nerves, but nerves, like legends, have long memories. When one ranger asked if he believed in the Watcher, the officer replied softly, "I believe in repetition, and repetition means intention." Time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest fears, but Helltown endures differently. It doesn't age, it rehearses. Those who visit describe a sense of being included, as though their presence completes a pattern already in progress. The Watcher no longer appears as a shape or shadow. It manifests as stillness, a synchronization between heartbeats and silence. Once felt, it can't be unfelt. One former researcher said that after spending a night near the barricade, every silence since has sounded crowded. He moved to another state far from Ohio, but claimed that sometimes just before sleep, he'd hear a voice from nowhere asking, "Do you live here?" He never answered, afraid that acknowledgement might qualify as permission. He died peacefully, they said, but his final journal entry was a single sentence. "It's almost finished learning." Even now, in the digital quiet of night, the Watcher persists. Streams of forgotten videos replay themselves in loops, their comments locked, their uploaders long gone. Each frame carries the same anomaly, a subtle flicker, a breath too soft to notice unless you listen for it. Perhaps it's compression, perhaps it's something else, but every copy shares one frame frozen at 3:07 a.m., timestamp intact. On that frame, buried deep in the static, there's movement, not toward the camera, but through it, as if the lens has become a window and something beyond is finally stepping forward. Those who pause the video report a faint distortion in their speakers, a low, polite inhale, as if the story itself is preparing to continue. And sometimes, just before playback ends, a voice whispers the last question it's learned. "Are you still watching?" The road remains closed. The signs rust quietly beneath the weight of seasons. The forest has taken back everything except the memory of waiting. On still nights, when the moon bleeds through the mist and the trees lean closer together, the valley exhales, slow, deliberate, practiced. Locals say if you stop at the barricade and hold your breath, you'll feel it breathing back. Not wind, not echo. Something remembering how to respond. It's said that Helltown no longer needs witnesses to survive, it just needs listeners. Because stories like this don't end, they adapt. They find new mediums, new voices, new eyes willing to stare into the quiet and call it curiosity. And when you finally turn away from the screen, when the last word fades and the silence presses in, you'll realize the truth all those before you did. You weren't watching Helltown. Helltown was practicing on you.